colleagues who are elected after 2024 may not know that in 2022, 287 of us parliamentarians were banned from entering Russia over our views about the Ukrainian crisis, including not just myself and the member for the New Forest, but indeed the member for North West Essex, the leader of the opposition. At that time, the House stood as one, standing up to that intimidation. Today, from the opposition, we get a dog whistle so loud about our colleagues who did nothing wrong apart from wanting to go and see for themselves what was going on. It could be heard on the moon. What a disgrace. Will the Minister agree with me that this government will always defend free speech? And defending free speech means defending the ability of people to go and talk about things they may not want to talk about.
As I've said, Madam Deputy Speaker, these parliamentary delegations are very valuable, and I want to see them continue.
In a remarkable display of political amnesia, the Conservative Party today failed to support a cross-party effort to defend UK parliamentarians who were banned from Russia for speaking out against Putin's invasion of Ukraine. The government's refusal to affirm the importance of defending MPs targeted by authoritarian regimes has sparked outrage, not least from those within its own rank. Back in 2022, a number of British MPs were sanctioned by the Kremlin for what were, in effect, acts of principle, speaking truth to power, standing up for Ukraine's sovereignty, and calling out Russia's flagrant violations of international law. At the time, there was broad political consensus that such sanctions were an attack not just on individuals, but on parliamentary democracy itself. Fast forward to today's events in Westminster, and that consensus appears to be fracturing, at least on the Conservative benches. A cross-party statement brought forward to reaffirm Parliament's collective opposition to authoritarian intimidation and to express solidarity with those MPs sanctioned by Russia met an awkward silence from the Tory front bench. Even more strikingly, a number of Conservative MPs abstained or actively distanced themselves from the initiative, prompting accusations that the party is failing to defend the very institution it claims to uphold. This marks a worrying shift. In the past, whether it was China targeting MPs for their comments on Hong Kong or Iran retaliating against critics of its regime, the response in Westminster has been swift and united. There was a clear message. Our Parliament speaks freely, and foreign powers do not get to dictate what British MPs say or do. That message, today, was garbled by the Conservatives' apparent reluctance to cross a new internal political line. One Labour MP, himself among those sanctioned by Russia, put it bluntly, "This isn't about party politics, it's about principle. When authoritarian states come for our parliamentarians, we respond as one, or at least we used to." And indeed, there were some Tory MPs who broke with their party's position. Their quiet rebellion, in the face of pressure from their own leadership, deserves credit. One backbencher said, "I didn't get into politics to be told that standing up for human rights is optional. Sanctions by Russia aren't a badge of shame. They're proof we're doing our job." The government, for its part, offered no clear justification for its stance. Ministers have remained tight-lipped, with one anonymous source suggesting that the move was intended to avoid escalating tensions with Moscow, a curious rationale given the UK's robust support for Ukraine in other arenas. Is it now acceptable to supply Kiev with weapons, but balk at symbolic gestures of parliamentary solidarity? Critics say the real reason may lie closer to home. With an election on the horizon, the Conservative leadership appears increasingly wary of any move that might unsettle its base or revive divisions within the party over foreign policy. The specter of populist flirtations with authoritarian leaders, seen most prominently in the rhetoric of certain pro-Brexit, pro-Trump factions, may be casting a longer shadow than previously admitted. Whatever the motivation, today's events have done real damage. They send a message not just to Moscow, but to parliaments around the world. Britain's commitment to democratic principles is now negotiable. That's a line authoritarian states will notice. The role of MPs in challenging regimes like Russia's is not a ceremonial one. It is an essential function of democracy. When MPs are sanctioned for speaking out, it is not just a personal attack. It is an attempt to silence Parliament itself. And when political leaders refuse to stand behind their own colleagues, they enable that silencing by omission. At a time when the international order is under sustained pressure, and when authoritarians are increasingly emboldened, democracies must stand taller, not shrink into diplomatic hedging. Parliamentary delegations, vocal criticism of tyranny, and the courage to endure sanctions for the sake of justice, these are not acts of provocation, but of principle. The Conservative leadership might prefer to avoid these uncomfortable conversations, but as today has shown, many in Parliament are not so easily cowed. The fight for democratic integrity doesn't end because it becomes inconvenient. And as long as there are MEs willing to defy both Kremlin threats and internal party pressure, there remains hope that Westminster can still live up to its democratic ideals.
Okay, but is reform a bit all talk and no trousers? I only say that because where have you been on the rape gangs? I mean, Rupert Lowe's managed to raise £500,000 for an inquiry.
We've spoken.
Have you raised any money for an inquiry?
We have spoken very clearly, very loudly against the appalling child abuse, these grooming gangs, these rape gangs.
You haven't done anything about it. It's like the two-tier sentencing thing.
We're literally...
Robert Jenrick moved the dial on that. Have you moved the dial on anything, do you think?
So we moved the dial on the thugs in Manchester Airport by saying we were going to pursue a private criminal prosecution. That finally led to the charges against those two individuals. Okay, so we moved the dial. So actually, we've led the way on all of this stuff.
But you haven't really moved the dial on rape gangs or two-tier justice.
We're like everybody else. We've said there need to be more inquiries on the rape gang, so I think we've absolutely moved the dial on that. Two-tier justice. We're the people that keep getting barracked in the House of Commons for talking about two-tier justice. That's literally Labour targeting reform because we're so relevant.
Is Robert Jenrick out Faraging Farage? He might be. I'm going to ask Kemi Badenoch this as well. Is Robert Jenrick out Jenricking Badenoch?
Competition's a great thing. It keeps us all on our toes.
You might need him in reform. He's quite effective,
Competition's
isn't
a good thing.
It's quite effective. Let's talk about your story about, this is quite extraordinary, taxpayers potentially footing the bill to rescue an £862 million pension fund for MPs. I beg your pardon?
Seriously, so the MP's pension fund is underperforming and the taxpayers are likely to have to put in tens of millions of extra cash in order to prop it up because it is insisting in investing in net zero, renewable, ethical, ESG type funds, which are underperforming, and that means that it's going to require more money to be put into it. And the trustees are putting political ideology ahead of their fiduciary duties. They admit it in their own documentation when they say they admit that ESG risks could impact on the returns. This is an absolute scandal that needs to be raised. Well, what can be done about it is I've written to the pension trustees. I've said this is unacceptable. I've said I think many of your assets are overvalued, and I want an explanation of what's going on, because many of the big investment managers around the world are moving away from this ethical ESG investing because it always leads to worse performance, and because this pension pot is propped up by the taxpayer, so the taxpayer is on the hook for tens and tens of millions of pounds of their cash, and I think that's fundamentally wrong.
Mind you, haven't all of our pensions been clobbered by this tariff war?
When Camilla Tominey puts a question to a politician, it usually cuts straight to the bone, and Richard Tice felt the blade this week. Appearing on GB News, the Reform UK leader was confronted with a pointed inquiry. Why, if tackling rape gangs is such a national priority for his party, is it being left to Rupert Lowe, a lesser-known figure in the Reform stable, to champion the issue? It's the kind of question that exposes fault lines, not just within Reform, but across the populist right as it jostles for relevance in the run-up to a general election. Tice, typically bullish on immigration and crime, appeared briefly flat-footed. While he tried to reassert Reform's commitment to law and order, it didn't quite mask the fact that his party's messaging on grooming gangs has been inconsistent and curiously delegated to second-tier voices. The optics are odd. Rupert Lowe, a former UKIP MEP and ex-chairman of Southampton FT, has emerged as Reform's de facto spokesperson on one of the most explosive and politically sensitive issues in Britain. But with Tice's national profile and the party's self-styled no-nonsense approach to crime, many are wondering, why isn't the party leader leading from the front? The timing of Tominey's interrogation is key. It comes as Robert Jenrick, the ex-immigration minister turned self-styled border hawk, appears to be out-foraging Farage in his bid to reposition the Conservatives as the true party of anti-migrant hardliners. His speeches, thick with warnings of cultural erosion and threats to national identity, have raised eyebrows and pulses within the Tory base. There's no mistaking it. Jenrick is angling for the post-Sunak, post-Plate conservatism moment, and he knows exactly which buttons to push. Nigel Farage, the original architect of Brexit populism, is currently more preoccupied with GB News segments and pub pints than political office. But that hasn't stopped a growing class of Conservative MPs from mimicking his methods. Jenrick's latest positioning has drawn comparisons not only to Farage, but to figures on the European right who've made a career out of stoking anxieties around immigration and crime. For Reform UK, which relies heavily on owning that territory, this is dangerous ground. The question then becomes, if the Tories are now singing from Farage's hymn sheet and Reform isn't seizing the narrative with its own heavy hitters, what exactly is the party offering beyond a familiar rebrand of grievances? That question becomes even sharper when set against the backdrop of yet another's Westminster scandal, this time involving MP's pensions. In a development that has somehow managed to fly under the radar, it's been revealed that the Parliamentary Contributory Pension Fund, CPF, is facing a significant shortfall, and guess who's picking up the tab? The taxpayer. While ordinary Britons are told to tighten belts, the pension scheme for sitting and former MPs is set to receive additional injections of public cash to stay afloat. The CPF, already known for its generous benefits and low retirement age, is becoming a symbol of political hypocrisy. Austerity for the electorate, feather bedding for the political class. It's an open goal for Reform UK, one might think. Yet the party's focus remains dispersed, its messaging oddly muted on what should be red meat for its base. Tice, who once made hay over MC's expenses and Westminster waste, seems strangely hesitant to go on the offensive. The political terrain is shifting. Voters are angry, and anti-establishment energy is once again building. But as Camilla Tominey's question to Richard Tice made clear, being angry is not enough. You have to show up. You have to own the issue. And crucially, you have to lead. If Reform UK wants to be more than a footnote in the Farage era, it's going to have to stop outsourcing its outrage and start acting like a party with teeth. Because in the cutthroat world of British populism, if you don't bite, someone else will.